Slavery had begun in 1619 when an American-built ship named the Desire brought 20 Africans to the shores of Jamestown, Virginia. It is impossible to say for certain, but approximately 6 to 7 million slaves were unwillingly brought to the New World in the 18th century alone. As this number grew exponentially, it seemed that slavery had become a part of life, and slaves grudgingly accepted their astonishingly low social status with no way out. The spread of abolitionism was hugely impacted through newspapers featuring articles that detailed the horrors of slavery. William Lloyd Garrison was a white American abolition journalist who used newspaper to write a column he nicknamed The Liberator. He was the first to invoke an idea of getting the public to view slavery from the point of view of the blacks, not to focus on the white slaveholder. He publicly rejected the notion of a gradual freeing of all slaves and demanded the universal freeing of all slaves at once. Garrison soon gained followers whom he nicknamed Garrisonians. They soon went on to create the American Anti-Slavery Society. This organization began with about 400 chapters in 1835, but then, just 3 short years later, they found themselves with over 1,350 chapters, toppling 250,000 members that followed his exact beliefs. Another piece of literature that really set off the abolitionist movement was the narrative of Frederick Douglass, which many of you may have read in history class. In the novel, Frederick Douglass describes how the slaveholders were trained in their art of slave captivity. For one, they would rip apart their families at an early age, so as to make sure they don't have any cushion to fall back on when they don't feel well or need comforting of some kind. The second major atrocity that these slaveholders would commit was just how quickly they would buy and sell slaves without even thinking what this would do to the slaves themselves. The slave trade was one of the most horrendous atrocities committed because it itemized the African American, making them seem like property rather than actual human beings with the same capabilities as white men. The third and final major point that Frederick Douglass makes through his novel was the lengths with which they would go to just to keep their slaves from obtaining any form of education. For instance, when Frederick Douglass arrives in Baltimore, the wife immediately teaches him the letters of the alphabet. When the husband comes down and finds out, he is livid and shuts down it immediately. Although the abolitionist movement benefited greatly from the help of Garrisonians and the accounts of Frederick Douglass, they are not the only abolitionists who contributed to the end of slavery. It wasn't until the North came away from the Civil War with a victory that the effects of the abolitionist movement were more fully realized. However, Garrison and Frederick Douglass did play a big role in jump-starting this nation toward the end goal of abolishing slavery.